I came on episode 56 and shared some of my paranormal experiences, but I have some more to share. In January of 2009, I was at school. This happened on a Sunday. I sometimes prepare for class the night before. I had turned out the light and locked the door and shut, I think it was my office door. And I heard this sound that sounded, it lasted 3 to 4 seconds. It was like an ooh sound, like it went low to high, then back down to low. And it really scared me really bad. So I left fast without getting something that I left behind. So my mom came over to help me out with the sound. We couldn't reduplicate the sound again. It was not from the outside, so it was inside. We just really couldn't figure out what the sound was. In October of that same year, this is when I last wrote something down, or next, some of my students were there, I think. I had went into the kitchen, into the hallway, into the kitchen to get a trash bag. Inside the wall behind where I was standing, I heard a knocking sound, which lasted about 5 seconds. And I don't remember if I knocked back or not, because by this time I was getting pretty agitated that, something was bothering me and bothering my students. And, a person can only take so much. So I don't know if I knocked back because I was getting really mad about it. But then a few minutes later, I heard the same sound come from behind me on the back wall of the building. It was a different spot. And of course, we have mice, but I knew it wasn't a mouse or mice or anything. So I had my oldest nephew to listen with me, but we never heard it a third time. And then my youngest nephew, we both smelled a sulfuric gas smell by his desk. And it wasn't him, because this smelled way worse than a person, with flatulence and stuff. But it was so bad that, he smelled it as well. And it was just really pungent. And we would smell that periodically. Now, we do have propane, but I know what propane smells like. And this was not propane, because we also have regular heaters and propane. That same month, one of my students was scoring some of his work, and he was facing the hallway, because that's the way we had the score station. We call them score stations. Some of them, they were two-sided, so he was standing at the place where he could see the hallway. And he said he saw a shadow as though it just left my office, and then it disappeared. So he told me about it. I checked it out, but I didn't see anything in there. As is a shadow, you probably wouldn't see it. So the next month, January of 2010, my niece went to the bathroom, which is an extremely long way from the classroom area. And I might have mentioned this before. If the student doesn't come back in time, I will go check on them, because there is a door down there, because some of them have tried to escape. Kids don't want to be in school. I get that, and we'd never lock the door unless we had a lock-in incident or something. So if somebody wasn't coming back in the amount of time I thought they should be coming back, I would go check on them, make sure they hadn't fallen, gotten sick, or left the building. So my niece was in the bathroom. I think she came back too soon, and that got me alarmed, because she was the one that saw a lot of this ghostly stuff. So she comes back, and she said she saw a shadow in the hallway, and I went with her. And she couldn't say much because she was scared. She was probably about 6 to 8 years old at this time. She pointed to the side of the outside door. So I waited for her to go to the bathroom, because she didn't want to be down there by herself. Because like I said, it was a long way. Our building was like an L-shaped kind of building. So the student that saw the shadow the month before, two of my other students told on him, and they said that they caught him trying to do a seance in one of the classrooms. Well, he was too young to know what a seance was, but I did have a talk with him about how dangerous that is to do. Definitely don't do a seance, and you definitely don't do one inside of a church building. But that's how these beings came into the building, because somebody did a seance back in the 80s. The same month, January of 2010, one of my students went to the bathroom, and she heard a door slam shut, like the supply closet door. It was like the women's bathroom, the men's bathroom, and a small supply closet. And they're all really small rooms. So she thought she heard that supply closet door slam. Then her brother went down to the bathroom and also heard a loud banging sound. My niece went back down there and heard a door shut too, all on the same day. And then we were all in the classroom and we all three heard loud bangs on the wall, but no one did it because I had a perfect view of all the students and they weren't kicking the walls and with their feet or anything like that. So we knew, even though it was wintertime, the building does shift. We could tell it wasn't a shift, especially if it was rapid knocking. So that same month, but the next week, my niece went to the bathroom and she was gone for over 21 minutes. And that's usually too long for me to go check on her, but I probably was so busy I didn't, because we had lots of kids in there. So I had one of my female students go check on her while I was tending to the class, because I think the boys were acting up and I couldn't leave them alone. And I was the only adult in the building at that time because my dad would go in and out doing his jobs, duties, and stuff like that. So she said that my niece was crying and had heard footsteps down the hall. So I went down there and she was crying, and I opened the door and I saw that she was crying, and she clung to me and said she heard footsteps all up and down the hallway. And this is a very, very long and narrow hallway. She saw shadows under the door. I think she was already done using the bathroom. So I had her to stay in the bathroom and just sit on the toilet lid while I shut the door. And I moved around in the hallway to see if I could reduplicate what she saw. And she said it looked like that. And she had said, well, who's there? And nobody answered her. And she yelled for me a lot of times, but I never heard her. And I have really impeccable hearing. I mean, I could hear lots, all kinds of things, and I never heard her. So it's possible she thought she was yelling, but probably wasn't, because she does have high anxiety. And for her young age at that time, I think she was probably about 8 years old. She probably was in a panic mode. She probably thought she was yelling for me, but I honestly didn't hear her at that time. Another student, he heard banging sounds in our school office in the Merit store. And our Merit store is a place where they can spend Merit money, cash. It's not real. And they can buy stuff like school supplies, toys, trinkets, that kind of thing. The next month in February, and I told the girls and the boys that they could take a buddy down there to the bathroom. There was only one stall bathroom kind of thing, so they would wait outside or just a little bit right here, because it traumatized my niece really bad. And I told her, you're not going to be scared as long as I'm here. I will help you any way I can. So I had her friend, who was a female, go down there with her to the bathroom, and she said she heard evil laughter, but the friend did not hear it. And I do know that spirits can make people hear or see or feel things that other spirits can't, because I did a lot of research on that growing up and stuff like that. And that's why some people can't see something in the same room as a group of people. It's not saying that those people are crazy, because they're not. They're just being deceived by the demonic spirits, because that's just what they do. And nobody can explain that better, but God can, but I can't. So, again, in that same month, I was helping my niece and her friend with their work, and we could all smell this sulfuric gas again. We could smell it all the way from the classroom into the kitchen, which we have to go through a hallway through. And then we heard several squeaking noises, but we didn't know what they were, and they weren't mice, so we couldn't identify the source of the sound on that one. After lunch that day, the kids were playing around in the auditorium. Now, this auditorium was not used by the church, so it was more like a youth group auditorium type thing. And there was like a pool table in there, piano, sofas, little ball games type stuff. I don't know what all kinds of stuff is in there. So the kids were in there playing around. And my oldest nephew was trying to say a lot of godly things, like, I love Jesus, and he's autistic. So, I mean, he's not really that bad autistic, but he was trying to say some godly things. And all of a sudden there was a lot of orbs that were around him. It was very creepy. And then we heard what sounded like two men talking a lot. And that really freaked us out, because my dad was the only man that's been in the building since almost the very beginning. And then my oldest nephew was playing dominoes in the playroom, and then he was talking in the kitchen. So I guess he'd come back down there and talk in the kitchen or something. So I go talk to him, and he said that he heard someone mumbling to him in another area, so he left, and that's why he came into the kitchen. And he told me he was done with all his work. Well, technically, when they're done with their work, they have to get it checked by a supervisor to make sure they've actually done the work, because kids will often lie about that kind of stuff so they can get out of doing work and play. So then the next month, in March of the same year, my niece went back down to the bathroom and came back and said she heard my voice saying, "Ah," like a scary voice. And she knew I wasn't going to play a trick on her and scare her. And then she heard a trash can following her down the hallway. And what she meant by that was kind of like it was carpeted, I think. Or was it? I'm trying to remember if it was carpeted or it might have been linoleum, but I think it was carpeted at that time. So for the sound to make that, I think she meant that it was being dragged down the hallway, maybe, or if it was being like somebody kicked it and it was just tumbling down the hallway. She didn't really make that clear. But when she turned to look behind her, the noise quit, and then she ran and she could still hear it. And we have lots of different classrooms, and every room in that building had its own size of whichever trash can. Like the kitchen, of course, had a bigger trash can. Little offices had little ones and so on, but she couldn't identify which trash can that was, but she didn't see it. She just heard the noise. And so then, somewhere between, I didn't record anything from April until November of that same year. So on Sunday, October 31st, I was over there working, which I tried not to work, but sometimes you just can't help it. I was there until late at night, and I heard a little girl crying. And that really bothered me really bad because, I expected to halfway see some little girl just come down the hall with, rubbing her eyes with tears. And I just can't handle that kind of stuff. It just really bothers me. So I didn't see anything. I just heard it. I had more students at that time because in 2010 and in August of 2010, we had like an additional 4 to 6 new students. And I made it a point to not tell them that the building was haunted. So I was letting one of my students score their work, and I was by his desk checking his work to make sure he filled in all the blanks. And I was about to answer another student's flag, and I heard a guy's voice say my name, which is Miss Dawn. I allow them to call me Miss Dawn. That student that I was going to answer her flag, she said she heard it too. And I asked the class if it was any of them, and they all said no, but none of them were old enough to sound like an actual guy or a man. So then later on, another new student had told me that she heard it too, and it was a voice that I didn't recognize and nobody else recognized because, like I said, it was only my dad in there, and he was usually at his office in another building. The student that heard my name being called too, I had her to write down what she heard, and it was 5 days later. So this would be November the 8th of 2010. She put that she was sitting at her desk working on her science, and she heard this deep voice, and it was a laugh. It sounded like it came from the hallway or the kitchen, and she thought it was a man's voice, but then it started to get evil, and it gave her the chills, and these are in her own words. That same day, I wrote that my niece was at my desk on my right side, and I heard a whimpering sound, which I thought was her because sometimes she would do that because she liked dogs and she liked to, sometimes whimper, but she said it wasn't her. Then the first girl that I was telling you about that wrote, her sister wrote November the 17th. She said, I heard a yell or a whisper say her name, kind of sounded ghostly, and she was at her office, and it was behind her in a way, and we called their desk their offices. And then she wrote the same day, about 20 minutes later, because she wrote down the time, because I train my kids to always write down the date and the time, because that's very important, I feel. I've done that my whole life, So she says, I heard a noise behind me and Miss Dawn and my oldest nephew at my desk, which Dawn's my desk, like walking and just noises. And so those were in her own words. Then on November 27th, I wrote that I heard someone walking in the kitchen, the sound of somebody's jeans brushing up against the other leg, like an attempt to be quiet, like when somebody's being sneaky and their legs are too close together, you can hear their fabric rubbing against the other side of the fabric. And then they said hello loudly. No, I said hello loudly, and the noise stopped. And then I searched the whole building except for the auditorium, but I found no one. So I think I was by myself at that time. Because, that was on a Saturday afternoon at 4:44 p.m. Then I'm thinking we had Thanksgiving break because the next incident happened December the 15th by the second sister. And she said she was in the playroom with my niece and another student on her right side. And we were talking and playing with some of the pony dolls, the pony horses that they had. And she felt some light breathing touch the top of her ear. And she said it was very warm. It was warm. And my niece said that she felt it too. She looked up to see who it was, but nobody was there. But they also heard the breathing, and she felt it at the top of her ear, and that really bothered her. And then we had Christmas break, and then nothing happened until February of 2011. There were 10 of us that I wrote down, counting myself. So I had 9 students and myself. So we had chapel on Wednesday. And so we got to class after chapel. I answered a few of their flags. And then all of a sudden I heard a man yelling for about 2 to 3 seconds. And he was like top of the lung type yelling. And I looked around to see if any of the students heard it too. But my oldest nephew heard it. And another student, well, he wasn't really a student. He was taking some college and he needed my help tutoring him. So I allowed him to be in the classroom, and he was a security guard. So that made me feel safer, just having a guy around. He's like in his early or mid 20s at the time, but he heard it too. I made a list of the people that all heard it. There were 10 of us that all of us heard it. And there were a few that didn't hear it. So I need to retract that, because there was 10 of us that heard it, and four of them did not hear it because my dad was there and he was getting on to one of the boys who was acting up because they sat near him, so none of them heard it. Now, there was another adult woman in there, but she doesn't really pay attention. She was only in there for just a short time, so she said she did not hear it. So she and I went to check the auditorium to see if the man was in there because, like I said before, the kitchen door would be available to anybody coming in off the street. And we didn't know, sometimes we live really close to the highway. So transient people will often, like not homeless people, but like people just hitchhiking across the country will often come to the church seeking for money or gas money or food or something like that. So I didn't know if somebody came in. So we searched the auditorium and there was nobody there. So then March the 3rd, I was helping one of my students at my desk with their schoolwork when I heard someone yelling down the other hallway. Now, during that time, we had a preschool teacher, and she would teach her 2 sons and her, because her sons were pretty young. So I figured it was her getting on to them. And of course, it's her kids. I'm not going to interfere because that's just what we don't do. If it's her kids, she can take care of her kids how she wants, as far as discipline goes, So a couple minutes went by, and the woman came and got me and said, one of your students, she didn't mention the name of the student, she said, she needs you. And so I went down there, and the student was crying in the bathroom. Now, see, I could hear her, so I just figured it was the teacher getting onto her kids, So I don't know why I didn't hear my niece before, but anyway, she said she went down, she was in the bathroom, and I was trying to calm her down because I did not want to go in the bathroom with her because that's not appropriate by any means, unless I got hurt or something, then that would be different. I found the handle locked because she wanted me to come in there, and I said, no, I don't need to be going in there. It's not proper. and she was on the toilet crying. And so I said, okay, I had to calm her down. She was really one of the hyper ones that you couldn't get calmed down. So I said, my first thought, she had been scared by something while she was using the bathroom. And I tried to calm her down. And I told her to take a deep breath and tell me what's going on. And she said she did. So she did that. And then she said she had shut and locked the door fully. She heard the handle turn because it squeaks. It's a really old door. And the door pushed open to where I had found it when I fell it in. There was like a little crack. Then that's when she screamed for me. But I didn't hear my name. I just heard a scream. I think it was 4 days later, she went back down there to go to the bathroom, and she wanted me to be with her. And so I stayed outside the door, like a little ways down the hallway. I mean, they were crying. None of these girls, the boys were a little tougher, but the girls, they wanted to make sure they could, with the door shut, of course, they wanted to make sure they could see my foot, my shadow on the door. And I said, no, that's still not proper. That's still too close to the bathroom. But I said, I will stand right here. I will hum. I will talk to you. I will do whatever so you'll know that I'm not going down the hall, because I would never, ever leave the kids by themselves. Never. If they asked me to. Sometimes they wanted to be brave and try to get through their fear, and we would pray about it and read the Bible and talk. And sometimes they might forget, kids are resilient like that. So what we did, we tried to reenact what had happened to her. So we tried to open the door with it being locked. And there was another side door that led to the preschool room, because that used to be a nursery. And back then it was just faster to go through the door instead of going around the door, because some kids, couldn't hold it that long. We tried with extreme force to react what happened. And I didn't want to do it my full strength because I didn't want to break the door, but it would not open like it had with her. And I said, the only thing that could be is a demon, because we tried everything I could think of to debunk it, to see if it was just maybe the floorboards moving, with the weather temperatures and stuff, but we never could reduplicate it. And then on March the 23rd of that same year, the same girl said, in her own handwriting, she said, I was taking a math test, and a big kind of manly voice and a hiccup, and her sister sort of heard it as well. But she says, I think only me and my sister heard it. But I'd never heard anything, because I was always alert hearing something. In March of 2011, one of my female students wrote, I was walking to go out the door, and I assumed she was talking about the kitchen door. That is where the students would go in and out of the building. And she says, and either she just looked or heard someone in there. She didn't specify where there was, but she said, she goes, so I stop and look at the window, and there's just a black figure, no details on a face, just pitch black, no hair. And she said she saw just a head and shoulders, and it was standing right in the middle of the sofas. Okay, now I know what she's talking about. She's talking about the auditorium, because where the sofas were. Or we also had a love seat by the water fountain right before you get into the classroom. And she said it was right in the middle of the room. And she writes, and Miss Dawn came, and I told her, and she said that she thought someone was in there talking or singing. She thought it was one of the teachers, but the teacher was in her truck. And so Miss Dawn opened the door to the auditorium and said hello, and looked, and nobody was in there, and nobody answered. And then the student heard a shush sound, like somebody else was telling her to shush, but it wasn't Miss Dawn. And that's all she wrote about that part. And then March 29th, the same year, her sister I wrote this, her sister was sitting by my desk, and she said she saw a black ball shape with a tail go over my oldest nephew's. All these desks were connected, so it was my oldest nephew and a female and a male student's desk, because they're joined together, but like in a wood partition kind of thing. And I wrote down that I can tell she wasn't lying about it, because I had seen the same thing myself several times, but I never told anyone, because I thought it was my imagination or my eyes seeing larger, blacker spots. So that's how I knew she wasn't lying about that. And then April 6th, I wrote that one of my students, we had chapel, and one of my students went to the bathroom. She came back and said nothing, but the teacher said the lights flickered and the floodlights came on. We had exit floodlights that would, at every exit door, every door, there was an exit sign, and we had lights in case the power went out. The student said while she was in the bathroom, she heard her name being called in a very scary tone, kind of like, this is not the student's name, but like her name was Jane. It would say Jane, like that. It would scarily like that. Then April 13th, and this is where it still brings back haunting memories for me. Most of these do anyway, but we were outside on the playground about, I wrote this at 1:14, so it had to be after lunch. And so I saw a kid wearing a dark blue shirt and a dark blue pair of pants. We had several colors of a uniform they could pick, and we didn't have everybody had to wear the same color. So this is what his uniform was, except for it wasn't one of my students, because he didn't have a head. He was a headless kid running behind the trailer. We had a trailer that we had originally used for our computer lab for the kids, but we turned it into a clothes closet for the church. Anyway, I saw this kid running behind the trailer. We had some old outhouses because our town is very old. Some outhouses still exist around. They're not in use, of course, but he was going closer to the outhouses, and I looked back there, but there was nobody there. And a rule of thumb is when the kids are outside playing, since it conjoins with 2 streets, or 3 actually, really, we don't allow them to be out of sight. I don't, because I get onto them if they wander. Now, if they're going to get a ball or a frisbee or something like that, then, I don't like that. So that's why I was running after the kid, or going after the kid. And I thought, wait a minute, he doesn't have a head. And I thought that was weird. And I can still picture that in my mind. And that was just really, I don't think I told any of the students because I didn't want to alarm them, because, you don't want to hear a bunch of screaming kids outside. I mean, naturally they're going to scream anyway, but that would put the neighbors on alert. That would be another terrible incident. So also that same day, one of my students heard the piano playing in the auditorium. And then when she was scoring at the larger score station, and another student heard it too. And then the second student, she said she saw this black ball outside when she was putting her dishes in the dishwasher. And we had a window that faced the backyard area, back where the trailer was. So she said she saw this black ball out there. And these students, I had a lot of interactions with all these types of students. I never figured out why. More students, I guess, produce more of these situations. I'm not really sure. So 5 days later, on April 18th, I wrote that we have 3 breaks. We have first break, lunch, and then second break. So this would be before first break, which I want to say is at 10 o'clock in the morning. So before first break, I let a student watch another student sleep on the couch. This is the couch that's on by the water fountain just around the corner. And he was on a lot of medication, and he just needed a lot. So that medication just really made him sleep. So we didn't have a room for a nurse's station or anything, because I usually took care of any scrapes or cuts that the kids might have got playing or whatever, So I chose this student because she was older, and she was doing her schoolwork while she was watching him sleep, because I just didn't want him to be by himself, because sometimes he would pretend to be asleep and wander around the building. And I trusted her, so I let her do that. But she said she came in to talk to me and said she saw a ghost girl with a white flowing dress all around her, but only half of her body. And her face was showing, standing in front of 2 of the students' lockers. And these lockers were open lockers, because we don't believe in locked lockers. And that way the students don't have to worry about, they're made out of wood. So somebody made them special for us with hooks, and we painted them white, and they had a place to put their schoolwork, their backpacks or lunches or coats and that kind of thing. So anyway, she said she saw that, and she probably would have been facing my office, which is right on the same wall as the classroom. And then at lunch, a male student told me he saw the same thing when he was scoring, because he could see the hallway where the lockers were. Only it was in front of my nephew's locker, my oldest nephew's locker. And then before all of this happened, this is what I wrote down, that we all heard loud banging on the trailer 4 to 6 times. And that trailer was just like probably if just a few feet away from the windows faced the trailer. We had windows on 3/4 of the room, so we could see the backyard, the street, and then the door outside faced a neighbor's yard. So, but anyway, they could see the trailer, and I went outside to check it out, but I didn't see anybody banging on the trailer. And so my student drew a picture of what the ghost looked like to her, and she said it had blue eyes. So I thought that was really creepy that she was able to see the eyes, and that's scary in itself. April 19th, one of my students said that the day before, she was on the couch after I left, and I'm not sure, I don't remember where I left to. I was always walking in and out of the building, or not the building, sorry, the classroom to make copies or something. And she saw a black hunched figure with a hoodie on with no face. She said she put her fingers, this is the student, she put her fingers over her eyes so she wouldn't see it, but she peeked through it. And then that's when she opened her eyes further and saw this thing. And she said it was solid black and not see-through. And it was between the black chair and the coat rack that we had. And she said it looked like a monk's scowl. And I thought, well, we don't have any monks around here, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything, 2 days later, I was talking to this same student who saw the black monk scowl thing. We were talking on the couch. And my other student was standing in the doorway. There's like this little extra room that we put extra curriculum in and extra test keys and score keys and stuff. And she said she saw this black ball again to the right of me. And she told me to come closer to her. And the other student and I did, because she didn't want to be right there by herself. But I didn't see anything. And the other student did not see anything. And then later on that day, one of my female students saw a brown half of head or a whole head of a person in my office by my window. And I had a window that faced the street. Another student, she heard footsteps while she was in the bathroom, but nobody was in the building. And that might have been during break time, like outside they would come in to go to the bathroom. So that might have happened when we were all outside. That's what I'm thinking, because it's during the spring at this point. Another student, April 25th, heard her name being called when she was in the bathroom again. She said it was long and harsh. She said it was in the bathroom, I think, with her, and it was a male voice. The next day, April 26th, the same student heard her name being called again while she was washing her hands. And that might have been the bathroom or the kitchen. I want to say the bathroom because that's where they usually would be at. They hardly ever went in the kitchen. Then the day after, April 27th, the same student was washing her hands again and she heard somebody tell her to come with her, or like they said, come with me. And that freaked her out. Then the following day, the same student was in the kitchen at break, and I was in the school office, which is just right down it's not my office, it's the school office, so it's like just down the hallway. And I heard her say, "I'm coming." And she asked me what I needed, and I said nothing. And she said she heard someone that sounded like me, my voice, call her name, but I didn't call her name. At 11:02 a.m., the lights above my desk flickered 2 times, and my student said she saw it too. And those kind of lights, I want to say those were or are LED lights maybe, where you have to screw in the long light bulbs and stuff. So sometimes they would go out because the building is really old. So I'm not sure if that was related to paranormal stuff or just the lights, but if they flickered and stayed on, I would say that would be paranormal. So since this was in April, the last entry for that school year, I assumed that nothing else happened. So now we go to the next school year, September 7th of 2011, and it was on a Wednesday. So about 11:15 or so, I heard a loud bang in the kitchen, and this is myself talking or writing. I checked it out. Nothing was there. And we did have a woman who would come in to help clean, and she hadn't even been there to clean yet, so I knew that was not her at all. September 26th, my niece came in and told me that a student saw a shadow, and I had her, I don't think he was a brand new student, but I had her to get her, I told her to go get him for me, because I can't remember what I was doing. So he took me down to, I told him I wanted him to show me where it all happens, where he saw it. And so he said he was in the bathroom with the light out, the door open, and he saw a dark, I think he was getting ready to go into the bathroom, and this is what he saw. He saw a dark shadow that was taller than he was, and he was probably about 4 feet tall, so it must have been about 5 feet something, go from the merit store door along the lockers, and there was lockers down there for the preschoolers, and go into the supply room next to the boys' bathroom. And so I can't remember if he had to go to the bathroom after that or not. I think his mom was one of the teachers, so she could always take him down there. That was more appropriate. That same day, I had made my nephew erase something with a cleaning solvent because he likes to, I wouldn't say vandalize things, but he likes to draw on the desk. I made him clean it up. That's how the kids learn. They clean it up after themselves, and they realize they don't like to do it. They won't do it. But he was a little tougher. So then, I think it was at we had a spare desk that they could sit there and do their spelling words and stuff like that. So he was doing that. And then another student was sitting there for his spelling words, then my niece. And she said the word hi with an exclamation point was on the desk, and it wasn't there when we left for lunch. And everybody denied doing it, so I had my niece to erase it just so she could just erase it, even though she didn't do it. She wasn't being punished or anything, but I'm beginning to think my oldest nephew wrote it on there because he did that exact same hi with the exclamation point in the other building when we moved over there. So I think the process of elimination was my nephew, but we can't prove it, so I wrote it down here because it wasn't there before we went to lunch, and he did not come back in the classroom. September 27th, I wrote down that I re-questioned my student about the shadow he saw in the bathroom, and he said what made him look was movement that caught his eye, and he smelt nothing and he heard nothing, but he felt cold, and when it left, it was warm again. The air around him, I guess he's talking about. He said he was scared, and I told him to tell me if anything else happens to let me know, and he said okay. And then the day before that, his mother's dog was outside with us, and she suddenly growled. This dog was a female. The dog suddenly growled for no reason while she was facing the trailer where that headless boy had went. And I thought that creeped me out some. And so the next day, September 28th, one of my students went to the bathroom, and I checked on him because he was taking way too much time. And sometimes kids, there's playrooms back there. Sometimes I've caught him in the playroom and got onto him. So that's why we have to kind of check. If I had more help, then I wouldn't have to have that checking on him. But anyway, he said he came into, and he was one of my new students at that time, and he didn't know any of the stuff that was going on. So he said, I checked on him because he said he came in the class and said he felt like he was being watched, and he heard a loud bang inside. He claimed not to hear me shut the door because the merit store door was a little hard to close, but he said he felt really chilly. And he asked if this had ever happened before, like shadows, etc. And I said, why do you ask me? Because I wasn't answering his question. I wanted to know I wanted to know if, I always try to make sure other students didn't forget the rule to not tell other brand new student or newer students. And he said, well, he had a couple of ghostly encounters at his previous house, and he thought it followed him. And he knows about I told him about the book, how I've been writing stuff in this book, and he said he knows about me writing in all the books and stuff, encounters. So as always, I told him to let me know if he had another paranormal experience and stuff. And I think that makes the kids feel more at ease when they think an adult believes them, because kids are really impressionable. And, I always try to debunk it, but if it's something spooky like that, there's no way to debunk it. Like if they heard a noise, we could say, well, did it sound like this? Could it have been this? And et cetera. And then we could say, hey, this time it wasn't ghostly. It wasn't paranormal. But most of the time it was. Like, I'd say 95% of the time it was. So that happened on September the 28th. So on October the 4th, the same student, the male student, the new one, he went to the bathroom. And he said when he was in the bathroom, he heard footsteps down the hall. No one was there, because I only allowed students to go one at a time unless they wanted to go down there for protection, sort of, or just to feel better at ease. He said when he got out of the bathroom, he felt a cold hand on his right shoulder with medium strength, like it was touching him and putting pressure on his shoulder. And I questioned him to make sure he wasn't lying to me, because he's a new student. So I didn't know if he would feed off of another student's story and kind of say, hey, I want some attention. I'll tell a story. That's kind of how I did. So I could tell he wasn't lying to me. The next day, I was in my office paying bills. And when I came in, my niece said she heard her name being called 4 or 5 times by the area with the half circle desk, that's in the classroom. And the student that was asleep on the couch before, she said he was asleep on the couch, so it wasn't him making that noise. And she said it sounded like me calling her, but she knew it wasn't me because I was in my office. And of course, it wasn't me because I was paying bills and stuff. The next day, October 6th, my niece told me that about 5 minutes after I left yesterday, and I think this was the time when I was leaving to go to my other job. That might have been, yeah, I think that's what I was doing. I was leaving to go to my other job. So I'd spend half the day, and then my dad would come in, and the other preschool teacher would take over my class during the day or in the afternoon. So she said, anyway, after I left, she heard her name being called by a female voice that sounded like mine, and she heard it coming from my office. So she looked over there, and they're not allowed to turn around in their chairs, but I guess she figured since I'm calling her, that she could. And I try to make it a point to go over to them so they wouldn't turn around, but sometimes I don't have a chance to do that. She said she saw a shadow on the wall as though it had just left my office, and then it ran along the wall, I think. And as it did, this really freaked her out. There's some loose papers on top of the lockers. And she said when the shadow ran over the wall, the papers blew. Like they would float, like if somebody ran past something so fast and the suction of the wind would just flip the pages. She said they all blew, and the envelopes were too heavy for me to move, because I was trying to reenact it. So I could, even as fast as I was moving, this would be the next day after I came back from work, I even moved slowly, then faster, and moved by them. And I had my niece to lift up the envelopes, and her eyes widened because they were heavy. So she knew that a person couldn't have done that, because I'm bigger than she was at the time, of course. And if a person couldn't move it, then she definitely knew it was spooky, ghostly. So she described the dress and skirt with shoes, but the weird thing was it had only half of a skull and a half of a heart-shaped necklace with no head. Now, I didn't understand why she could see, or maybe she was describing the necklace. I think the necklace was a half skull, half heart necklace, yeah, with no head. She said because it went above the shadow line and it looked at her, then ran. And I was thinking, how could it look at her with no head? But she probably meant the shoulders probably turned to look at her, because it all happened so fast and she probably couldn't process it. She was probably about anywhere from 8 to 11 years old, not 11, probably about 8 years old or 9. And she said, I went ahead and measured it from where she saw the neck, and it measured 6 foot in height. So this this shadow that she saw was 6 foot tall. That was her biggest fear. She doesn't even like talking about it today because it really bothers her, and she's 20 years old. As of last year, she turned 20. So this has happened quite a bit ago. 5 days later, on October 10th, I wrote that no one was in the kitchen, but I heard a man cough or clear his throat, and nobody else seemed to hear it. So this is at 9:00, so I'm thinking we might have been in the kitchen for something. Usually we'd be in the classroom by 8:30, so I'm not sure why I wrote nobody else seemed to hear it. October 26th, I wrote down that I went down halfway to the hallway by the bathrooms to check on the student who likes to sleep a lot. He was in the bathroom, and he was the one you really have to check on. And I went back to the kitchen. When I realized he was still in the bathroom, I just came back to the kitchen, and I heard him running down the hall. And when I told him he didn't have to run because we didn't allow running in the building, I noticed his eyes were already wide with fear, and he said he felt someone touch him on his left shoulder as though they grabbed him from behind, so he ran. And that's the same hallway that the other boy on his other shoulder felt it. And so the same day, the student that was grabbed on the shoulder on the right side was hiding in the learning center by the first desk by the entry door. I'm not sure why he was hiding. I didn't write down why he was hiding, but he said he saw a shadow under the lights in the storage room in my office because there's an extra door. It used to be a baptistry, so I turned it into a storage room. And he said he saw the light was on because it goes through to the other side where the extra curriculum, it's a jointed thing. And he said he could see shadows of somebody walking in there. November 1st, I wrote that my orange mechanical pencil that I use off my desk was missing. I always leave it laying on my desk. Students are not allowed at my desk unless I give them permission. And I looked all over with the kids' desk, my office, the school office, the fax office, all these offices, and I couldn't even find it. So then 9 days later, I found it, and it was in my zipped black binder, which I never put that in there, so I'm not sure how that got there. And we've had stuff disappear and reappear over the years, too. And then on my niece's desk, there were some small letters written on her desk, and she claims that she didn't do it. And I'm not sure what the letters were, but that was pretty much what that was. And I recorded that just in case it turned out to be a paranormal event. And then the student whose right shoulder was grabbed, he said he heard someone trying to open the storage door in my office, but I was down the hall, he said. And that door kind of sticks, so you could definitely hear it, somebody trying to jar it loose because the wood would stick because the building's old. And so when the weather changes, it expands and all that kind of stuff. So then that same day, I heard what sounded like a cup falling on the floor in the kitchen, but nobody had left the learning center, and that especially included my dad. So nobody was in there, but there was no cup that was actually on the floor. And then the same day, all of us but my dad heard what sounded like scratching in the walls, but it also sounded electrical, and I couldn't explain that any better, except it may be like a crackling sound. I'm not sure what that was all about. Then on November the 15th, that's 2011, I wrote that I was looking through the window that you can see through the door that leads outside by the water fountain. So there was like 5 doors to the entire school building, and in our classroom you can see the door with a little bitty pair of steps. That's another exit door that's by the couch and the water fountain, so I could see through, and this is really creepy. So I could see that, and I think it had a short curtain above it. So I was looking, that's where my desk faced, so I could always see the students and who could come in. And so it was kind of cloudy, and I saw suddenly movement on the other side of the door, and it was really big movement, and it looked like somebody was standing there wearing a tan shirt, because the area, I could have seen the person's chest and on up, And then I saw the left curtain move as though somebody had a hold of it and then let it go. And I said, it's been slightly moving ever since, and there's no vent anywhere near that. There's a vent, but it's under the couch, and we closed it off. So there's no way wind could come through. And that's what I wrote here, a note. The only vent is under the couch, sealed off for years because, we just never used it. And I've never seen those curtains move ever. And the heater was not on during that time. Same day, one of my other students said he heard his name whispered by a female behind him. And he said they said his name softly and not drawn out. The same day, another student saw a black mass fly outside the door during class time. Twice, he said. I thought, okay. So it seemed like I was really busy writing down all the encounters, but I'm pretty good at, I do it whenever I have a spare moment, but I write it down so I don't forget it. So I write down the time when it happens and the time that I'm writing it down. Usually it's about the same time. Anyway, there's a lot of pages, but on November the 16th, a student said he felt somebody breathing in his ear at his desk. And the youth group of our church did use that building on Wednesday nights. And sometimes they had a lock-in, which I knew there was going to be things happening there, and there was. But anyway, my oldest nephew was at youth, and he said he heard his name being called by the far room, and the shade was being turned, and he was shaking and not smiling. So that's how I could tell when he was telling the truth, is when he's shaking and scared. But when he's smiling, he's always lying. So that's how we catch him in a lie. And that's always the funny part, because he can't lie very good, which is good, I guess. November 17th, my niece was alone in the playroom, and she was by the two doors and saw the toy laptop lid slam shut. And we all debunked this by jumping up and down. Nothing happened because we set the lid back up. We were trying to figure out why it was shut by itself. We purposely lightly let the lid shut, but it was stuck and it never ever shut. So I took a picture of it lying flat, and I have no idea where that picture is. But anyway, that was really creepy because she said it just slammed shut. November 30th, waiting for my lunch to cook, and I went down the hall. And by this time, I had been really stressed out by all the spirits in the building. So I went down there to pray that the spirits would leave. And then I heard my name being whispered. So I left immediately. I'm like, okay, it's not that I wasn't strong, but I just get freaked out, So I didn't finish the prayer. But, you can always pray silently and deal with that too. And then before this happened, I was in my office paying bills, and I could have swore I heard whisperings come from the storage room. It was a lot of stress having to deal with all these, and there are a lot more stories. So I will stop this for now and then pick it back up where I left off.
If you've had a paranormal experience and would like to be a guest on the show, please contact us by going to myparax.com. That's myparaex.com. Thanks for listening.